trying to prevent, like, still recording as I'm... Well,
yeah, going through all that.
Until next time. It got dark all of a sudden. That's season 6. It was night, and now it's day.
Just in case you didn't know, I'm Brian.
And I'm Matthew.
And this is Road Trip Recap.
Spoilers up ahead, as today we talk about the Dead Man's Blood episode of Supernatural.
And what do zombies and vampires have in common other than rising from the grave? They have a lot of lore. Like a ton of it.
All right. Well, buckle up and let's go. Our episode today starts off in Manning, Colorado, where we go inside a bar and we see an older gentleman. He's looking through what appears to be a hunter's notebook, and we find out that's Daniel Elkins. Which, first of all, Daniel Elkins was played by a Terrence Kelly, who we see come back in season 3 as a doctor in the episode where the other doctor is living forever by harvesting organs and stuff from people.
Oh.
He's not that doctor, but he's another doctor in that episode.
Okay.
Anyways, as he's there, like, looking through his stuff, there's a guy that's kind of making fun of him because, he's just like a weird guy, and the bartender's like, give him a break. And this one I'm guessing at because there was someone who was just credited as Trucker, and this is the only place that I could think that a trucker may have been present. But the trucker was played by Sean Tyson, which I'll look through and, like, it'll be like the actual picture if I'm wrong, but otherwise Trucker will be down here. And Trucker comes back later in season 9 episode 1 as Trucker again. So far headcanon works because he could be the same Trucker, because why not?
He is typecast at this point too.
But then he also comes back in season 13 as a guy named Marty. And I forgot to look up, like, specifically what episode that was. He also comes back as a clown ghost in the first episode of the last season. So he's been in a few episodes, anyways.
He was able to break out of that typecasting at the end and became a clown.
Everybody loves a clown, so why don't you?
Because they're terrifying.
Oh, fair. Anyways, so, that's all going on. Then we get a group of people coming in and, ordering, Jack all around, leave the bottle. And Elkins just he disappears. He just gets the F out of there. He runs home, but he's followed. And, we see him, he runs to, like, his wall safe thing that's behind things, which I love, like, secret compartments and stuff. I want that.
Secret compartments everywhere.
Right. So he pulls out a box, there's a gun in there, he gets it loaded, and then, they get the drop on him. Literally. And, there's a little bit of the, guns won't work on us. That's kind of silly. And they kill him. So we then cut to Sam and Dean. They're in a restaurant, I believe. Like, I watched it yesterday, but I already forget, like, details on what happens. They're sitting down, talking. Dean's like, you find anything? Sam's looking for anything suspicious. There was a lady that fell out of a plane and survived. And, Dean's like, I feel more like, that's incredible than, anything of ours, which, fair, it was. And, then Sam mentions in Manning, Colorado, there was a Daniel Elkins that was mauled inside his home, all this and that. And then Dean's like, wait, I know that name. I'm like, well, it doesn't seem familiar to me. So Dean goes to Dad's journal, opens it up, and there is a contact number for a D. Elkins, which accurately does have a 970 Colorado area code, which Dean does claim is a Colorado area code, which is like a big area code. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen a map of, like, the area codes in Colorado, but 970, like, starts on the left side of Colorado. You know, Colorado's this big square.
The western side of it.
It goes up over the top to the right side.
Dang.
Because, like, I'm from the right side of Colorado, and I have a 970 number. And then I come over here, and it's 970 also. But I'm on the other side of the state. Anyways, that's all besides the point. So Sam and Dean go to investigate. They go into his cabin, which is still a mess. Like, I guess guy being mauled to death inside his home can be reported on, but it's not a crime scene. Like, there's just stuff everywhere. Like, they didn't investigate. I guess maybe they just thought it was an animal, so they just leave things as they are. I don't know.
Whatever.
I'm sure Supernatural explained this away and somehow.
We're learning that a lot of the cops in Supernatural are not necessarily the most observant of kind of what's going on, or maybe more denial. I don't know.
So anyways, you know, Sam and Dean are kind of getting an idea that this guy may have been a hunter. And Dean sees some scratches on the floor, and so he uses a pencil to do like a rubbing of it, and he in his final breath, Elkins managed to write down his P.O. box. So Sam and Dean go to investigate, and they find a letter for J.W. So, like, J.W., do you think that could be John Winchester? Could that be Dad? Like, what do we do? Should we call him? Somebody's knocking. And, well, when they were at the house, we see that they were being watched. Mm-hmm. We find out now John is there, and he was the one that was watching them, and he's like, give me the letter. Like, I did know this guy. Like, he was a good man. He looks into the letter, and he's just like, he had it this entire time. And John's being kind of vague. Sam wants answers. John doesn't want to give them. That's going to be kind of...
they start headbutting.
Yeah, pretty early on. So it's within this that, John reveals that he was probably killed by vampires, which Sam and Dean thought that they didn't exist. John thought that they were extinct, but, as we get into, like, later episodes and everything, they are all but extinct.
Yes.
So I don't know how they managed to slip under his radar for as long as they did, but anyways, we then cut to the vampires setting a trap. As there's a couple driving down the road. One of them just lies in the middle of the road, so they stop, and then they get the jump on them. With this couple, however, we meet Jenny. Jenny is played by Christine Chatelain. I'm just going to assume that I'm going to butcher everybody's name, and I apologize. Here, moving out forward. So anyways, Jenny is played by Christine Chatelain, who we see come back in the Changing Channels episode as Dr. Ellen Piccolo on the hit show Dr. Sexy.
That is a great episode.
She also comes back as Jenny in the last episode of the series. So we're just going to leave it at that. Anyways, the one driving, Jenny's boyfriend, was played by Damon Runyon. And he comes back as Unknown in Season 3, Episode 10. So I'm going to have to look up to see if I can find Mr. Unknown in Season 3, so we can get a side-by-side from that.
Unknown or uncredited?
It's listed on IMDb as Unknown. And I just, that's super helpful. So we get, Sam, Dean, and John are investigating where the vampires had attacked, kind of, but it's more like John has Sam and Dean staying back while he goes to investigate, and Sam still wants answers. John's just like, yeah, we're on the right track. How do you know? He was like, well, vampires have loose teeth. We see the vampires' hideout, and we see that the couple is actually still alive. And we get a grand entrance from Luther as, he shows up and the door is just parked for him. And side note, as we get throughout this episode and everything, I like what they do with the vampire's eyes whenever lights shine on them. Mm-hmm. We get, they kind of reflect the light.
Kind of like a cat's or...
Yeah, which I don't think stays throughout the series, like, I don't think that's a reoccurring theme. But in this episode, when we get light shining on them, as we'll see later, like, their eyes kind of reflect the light. Luther finds out about Elkins, you know, that he was taken care of.
Yeah.
And he's not happy about that because he knows, like, Elkins was a hunter. Other hunters will investigate. And we don't want that because Luther's been around for a while. Because Kate gives him the gun that she took from Elkins, and she's like, you know, I think it was made around the time that you were born, which is like early to mid 1800s.
Yep.
So he's been around for a while. He doesn't want to deal with hunters. Like, yes, Elkins was a pain in his past, but he just wanted to
Wants
let
to
it go.
survive.
Yeah.
Probably how he was able to avoid extinction for so long. And sometimes all you have to do is just hang out below ground.
Yeah. Not cause trouble.
Yep.
So we get some more, like, dynamics with the family. Sam still wants answers, so him and John really start butting heads. Dean just wants everybody to get along, and they're still trying to, you know, piece things out, which I get. You know, like, John's being real vague about everything, and you know, they can't be super effective if they don't know what it is that they're doing or why they're doing it, and that just really goes for everything.
Yeah.
Like, in, like, work scenarios and stuff. Like, if you just tell somebody, do this because I say so, they may still do it, but grudgingly so.
Yeah.
But if you're like, hey, do this because of these reasons, they're more likely to, like, want to do it. So in our last episode, you know, I mentioned that this was the first time that, like, the Impala looked dirty.
Yeah.
They did that specifically, I feel, just so that way they could add that dynamic of John yelling at Dean, like, hey, why don't you touch up your car? Wouldn't have given you the damn thing if I thought you're going to ruin it. And these are, like, one of the only times that we ever see it, like, actually dirty.
Yeah.
Is in these two episodes. There are other times where, you know, there will be some, like, it's not in pristine condition, but...
Yeah. Like at the end of season 1. Spoilers up ahead.
We then cut back to the vampires, and we get the vampires getting ready to be kind of freaky in front of their food. But it's actually not food. They're deciding to make Jenny part of their family.
Yep.
Which I don't like Jenny. Anyways, so then we get back to Sam and Dean and John. They're getting ready to attack the nest. And we get just kind of a look at how John's just trying to outcool his sons. You know, like, he's got, like, the, like, slide out thing from his truck that's all, like, fancy, and then
Has custom, like, holders for all of the weapons.
right. And your Dean's like, hey, we got an extra machete if you need one. He's like, I think I'm good, as he's got a better machete than they do. And
I will not lie, though. I want that for my own truck. Whether just be able to... I don't think that I would be able to get away with having so many weapons in a vehicle.
probably not.
Nor would I ever have a need or want for all of those weapons inside of a vehicle. But I still want that for my vehicle.
That's fair. So it's around now that we finally get kind of more of an explanation on this gun that they're after. Because, again, like, Sam wants answers and everything. So we learn that the gun maker, Samuel Colt, made the special Colt revolver, which it's listed, I think, that it was made in 1835 under Halley's Comet, the night the men fell at the Alamo, which they fell in 36. But I think that could just be, you know, a part of, like, legends happen. And so, like, I don't think it's relevant, like, what was going on aside from the comet. Like, maybe the comet gives it special properties, but I don't think people falling at the Alamo really matter in the context of making a special gun. Let me clarify that. Like, I don't think people need to be falling at the Alamo to make a special gun. Anyways, so it's rumored that this gun can kill anything. And so John wants it to kill the thing that killed his wife.
Yep.
So they learn a little bit more about vampires. You know, crosses don't work, sunlight doesn't work. Really, the only thing that does work is cutting off the heads. They still don't like sunlight, so they will sleep during the day, but they can still go out in the sun. Mm-hmm. Side note, the vampires actually have Bobby's car. If you look at their lineup there, we'll see that car again.
Good old Bobby.
So they go in, and John's looking for the gun. He finds it. Sam finds a victim. Dean finds other victims. But the victim that Sam finds is not a victim, and he should have killed her.
Guess what? It's Jenny!
Yeah.
Who Matthew's still very bitter about.
Well, I mean, she comes back in the final episode with the rest of her friends that caused the final episode. He should have killed her. Anyways, so she causes a ruckus. They gotta take off out of there. The vampires won't chase during daylight hours, so they're safe until nighttime. You know, they're going to set their own traps. So John sends Dean to the funeral home, and you know, we get a scene of him and Sam talking, and they kind of reconnect a little bit, where John was like, you know, when you were born, I set up a savings account. It was a college fund, put in $100 a month. You know, it did the same thing for your brother. Like, I never wanted this for you. And, you know, they connect a little bit, and there's the nice part of saying, you know, whatever happened to that college fund? Spend it on ammo. You know, they kind of laugh. And so Dean shows back up, and he has a jar of blood, which at this point we are not told within the episode, like, what the point of all this is. So then we get Dean. He's having car problems, and so he's dealing with that, and Kate shows up. And, you know, she's talking to him and, you know, grabs him by the throat and is threatening him, whatever. But then she starts having some chest pains as there's an arrow protruding from her chest. And then it's revealed that the arrows were soaked in dead man's blood, which in the supernatural universe is like poison to vampires. So, it's the kind of poison that doesn't take effect until they know that it's poison. You know, one of those convenient poisons. So they kill the
or a dramatic reveal poison.
Right.
Yeah.
They kill the other vampire that was with Kate. They take Kate hostage. So John reveals that they can use Kate for a trade because vampires mate for life, and so that's kind of what they're doing. John wants to go it alone. He's like, you guys are done. Like, I'm going to take it from here. And Sam's like, no, like, we need to back you up. And Dean's actually, like, taking Sam's side on this. He's finally, like, he's always been the one to just follow orders as they were given. But now he's like, you know what? Like, Sam's got a point. We don't want to just leave you to this. So, they have their spat, and then John still gives his orders, whatever. So we get to where John's driving along in his truck with Kate, and he starts being chased by some vampires with their disappearing, reappearing cars. Because they do the whole thing where they're behind him, and then they're gone, and then they're in front of him, and that's where we get the big, like, light reflection on the eyes, whatever. So while this is going on, Sam and Dean are breaking into the nest, and they're saving the victims that Dean didn't get to save earlier. And so they get those people out of there, and John's talking with Luther, and he's like, you know, I just want the gun. You give me the gun, I'll give you the girl. And he looks like he's gonna honor it. He's just like, you know what? I don't want any trouble. I just want her back. Yeah. But then, right as John's about to get the gun, he's just like, almost made it out, and then he gets attacked. So now, looking like trouble for old John Winchester. However, magical arrows appear as Sam and Dean Batman their way in. Which,
although I think it's almost more appropriate to say they green arrow their way in.
Yeah. They come rushing in, and you know, they're trying to help fight things off, and Sam gets caught by Luther, and you know, the whole like drop it, or you know, I'll rip his throat out, or whatever he threatens. And then at this point John's just like, no you don't. and he shoots Luther with this gun, and then we get to see it in effect as it like very dramatically like destroys this vampire.
Yeah.
And,
Great headshot too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was in close distance again.
That's true.
And so we kind of end our episode with John agreeing to kind of team up with Sam and Dean to take out this thing that killed Mary. So it's kind of where we're left with this episode. So you got 6 minutes. Is that enough time?
I think we can make that work. So, vampires is a tricky subject. Matthew, to you, what is a vampire?
What isn't a vampire?
So a vampire can almost essentially be defined by something that rises from the grave, but not always, and drinks blood. That's really going to be the biggie behind what a vampire is it's a mosquito. It's a blood drinker in a mythological and folk term sense. I say sometimes it rises from the grave because if we look back at the Striga episode, the Striga was basically defined as a vampire witch. So necessarily this person doesn't have to die, although they sometimes do die and then they come back from the grave. They don't necessarily have to die. Sometimes it's a pact with the devil that allows them to drink blood. There have even been some stories about becoming a vampire through pacts with the devil and things like that. And even in modern days, like some of the Castlevania video games and in some of the other Dracula video games, Dracula does not die to become a vampire, but instead makes a pact with the devil and is able to become a vampire that way. But I guess, so we look at the modern day vampire, and it's a conglomeration of a lot of different cultures. I'd say almost 95% of all cultures leading up to Bram Stoker's publishing of Dracula have some sort of vampire within their culture.
Okay.
Sometimes they're vampires, sometimes they're upir. There's a lot of different cultures that have it, and it's not just Transylvanian or Romanian or even Europe. One of the oldest examples of a vampire actually comes from China, the Jiangxi. The Jiangxi is a vampire that it rises from the grave if an ancestor has been disrespected by not being buried properly. It rises from the grave, will kill you with a single touch, and it has the two fangs. It kills you with a touch and then drains you completely of blood. So that's one of the oldest examples of a vampire. We don't really see the modern day vampire until Bram Stoker publishes Dracula.
Okay.
Which really he was planning on calling him Count Vampire or Count Vampire originally. But so Bram Stoker's never been to Transylvania. He's never been to Romania. In fact, he was an Irish part-time novelist.
Okay.
Who happened to be taking a trip in Britain at some point and was going through a bunch of different texts, a bunch of different history books, things like that, and he came across, in his research, a Wallachian lord by the name of Vlad Tepes, or Vlad Dracul Tepes, or Vlad the Dragon, or, as he's more commonly known, Vlad the Impaler.
Heard of him?
Who was known very much for his bloodlust in the war with the Ottoman Turks, and also his impaling of them on wooden spikes, in which he would actually dine amongst the corpses and even was rumored to drink the blood of the corpses as he was dining. It was a very...
I'm reminded of the meme of Vlad the Impaler discovering marshmallows. It's like, well, these are great.
These are great. But he decides to take his nickname of Dracul the Dragon, and he turns that into Dracula. He was also inspired by Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory in the 1600s was a countess that had gone a little insane and decided that the blood of virgins would actually help her keep her youthful appearance. After striking one of her chambermaids, she decided that the blood that was on her hand actually made her skin look nicer. And so she made a habit of taking a bunch of poor virgin village women, bringing them to her castle under the guise of having like a boarding school,
Okay.
and then killing them and bathing in their blood.
It's one of those, like, going back a little bit, you use certain terms and, like, you get, like, a mental image and everything. And so, like you said, like striking one of her servants or whatever. So I just picture like a psh. But then it's followed up with, looked at how much blood was on her hand, was like, that looks real nice. That's not a psh. That's like, look at that. Well, look at that.
I mean, depending on how big the ring is.
That's fair. I wasn't thinking of rings.
I mean, if she's a countess, she's going to have some, like, probably nice, big, gaudy jewelry even. So the modern day vampire is a conglomeration of what we see, and even to this day there's no real consensus about back during Bram Stoker's days, vampires could be driven off with garlic, they could be driven off with sunlight was fatal to them, they could be killed with a stake to the heart, they could be beheaded, things like that. And then as we start getting a little bit further into vampire mythology, they gain a vulnerability, like in the Blade movies, they gain a vulnerability to silver. They still maintain their vulnerability to garlic, but they lose their vulnerability to faith and the cross and Christianity. So they start to move away from that Dracula idea. They also start to move away from that very Anne Rice and Bram Stoker inspired, very suave, almost sexy vampire. Then we start to devolve a little bit further as we then look at like the 30 Days of Night vampire, which are just these brutal, animalistic, a little bit closer to what the supernatural vampires are. They don't really delve into a lot of the weaknesses that these vampires have in 30 Days of Night. However, stabbing them through the chest works really, really well again. In fact, that's one of the main things that we see throughout history has worked really well on vampires, is staking them through the heart.
Okay. Just sometimes it depends on what material has to do it.
What material has to do it. Sometimes it's very dependent on, it has to be a specific tree, it has to be ash, it has to be oak, it has to be aspen. It's very dependent on that. And the theory behind where that came from was from some old texts about how to take care of a vampire. So originally what you would do in order to kill a vampire in some European context, I'm saying some European context because they all differ a little bit, but this is where kind of that idea of the modern day vampire came from, is that you would stake it back to the ground. It wasn't specifically that you were destroying the heart.
Right.
You were taking a stake and you're driving it into the vampire's chest and nailing it back to the earth so it couldn't rise again. And then you would cut its head off and then fill the mouth with garlic and then rebury it, and vampire is now dead. So moving back to, we've got the 30 Days of Night vampire, and then we move into a little bit more of like, we kind of have vampires take a hard shift with the Twilight vampires.
We don't talk about that.
Where they're not sensitive to the sun anymore because the sun actually makes them sparkle, but they still feed on blood. They still have superhuman strength, superhuman agility, and taking their heads off still works wonders.
Okay.
And now we can even look at Supernatural has now supplied their own version of what they view a vampire to be and how to be able to kill it. And again, they kind of stick with some of the old ideas, but then now they've added a new one to it, which is the dead man's blood, which is actually an idea that I really, really like. Because let's say it's basically food poisoning. Let's say I eat some bad tuna or something at some point, and that is gonna noticeably make me sick. If you have dead man's blood, if you have basically rotted blood that's or even full of formaldehyde and other chemicals from essentially a funeral home, because you're not really going to be able to get dead man's blood from a cemetery, but from a funeral home, that's basically like giving the vampire a low grade of food poisoning. Or even if I have a limb that has gone gangrenous, that's basically getting a dead limb attached to you.
See, that makes me wonder, like, how dead does the man's blood have to be? Like, if they're feeding and the guy dies while they're feeding, will that then poison them because it is now dead man's blood?
It could also be that you're looking at, it's like dead man's blood is like an overarching, like someone who's been dead for a while, someone who's been like dead enough that you can, if eating their flesh would give you food poisoning, then probably drinking their blood might give you food poisoning. It also takes away this idea that vampires could be scavengers. They can't be scavengers. They have to now, at this point in time, they have to be hunters, because if they're scavengers, they would just basically die. So they've got to be intense hunters in this area. So that's kind of a very brief overview of what the vampires have looked like and how Supernatural has now contributed to them, all the way from Bram Stoker taking a bunch of different cultures, because it's really hard to condense down and nitpick, like, well, if it was this vampire, this would work, this would work.
Right.
Instead, we have to look at Supernatural's vampires as a whole, as a brand new breed of vampire.
Okay.
And so, like, the question is that going to work in real life? Is that going to work in Supernatural's universe? And as long as it works in Supernatural's universe, it's working in Supernatural's universe.
Right.
And it's a really cool addition to the vampire lore and the vampire mythology, which is taking which is exactly what Bram Stoker did with all these other cultures, and what all other vampires have done since then, which is taking a little bit of pieces and then mishmashing them together and creating something brand new, something unique to the mythology and to the lore that they're following.
Fair enough.
In later episodes, because we are going to start seeing more vampires, as you hinted at later, in later episodes I am going to dive a little bit more into certain cultural versions of vampires, because they get very, very interesting, especially when we start looking at the vegetarian vampire episode in season 2. Spoilers up ahead for season 2 for that, or spoilers in the back, whatever. Hindsight. So yes, that is the vampire in Supernatural's universe.
Fair enough.
And a very, very brief history of what inspired them to be that. And Matthew, what do you think we're looking at next episode?
Demons? I mean, what are we focusing on specifically? Because it's the first part of the, kind of like a 2-part episode of them, like, finishing out season 1, and, you know, they're dealing with the cult and the demons, and cult, not cult.
Cult. We are going to be taking a look at the Seal of Solomon. It's a little bit early.
Fair enough.
It's a little bit early into the episode, but I feel like that's a perfect time to start getting it done. But we're going to be taking a look at the Seal of Solomon and a Devil's Trap.
Sounds good. Well, until next time, stay safe, buckle up, and
we got work to do.
I was trying to prevent, like, still recording as I'm, well,
Yeah, going through all that.
until next time. It got dark all of a sudden. That's season 6. It was night, and now it's day.